For decades, these cases haunted families, baffled investigators, and left entire communities searching for answers. They were the mysteries that refused to fade, the stories that lingered in the background, unanswered and unresolved. Families grew older, investigators retired, and communities moved on, but the echoes of these crimes remained. In recent years, however, advancements in technology, tireless detective work, and sometimes sheer luck have brought long-awaited answers to cases that once seemed destined to stay cold. Today, we're delving into some of the most disturbing cold cases that have been solved recently, shedding light on stories that finally found resolution after years, and in some cases, decades of uncertainty. The breakthroughs we'll discuss weren't just a matter of time passing. They came about thanks to revolutionary advancements in DNA technology, the rise of genealogy databases, and the relentless determination of both investigators and citizen sleuths. Forensic science has advanced in ways unimaginable when many of these crimes occurred. Tools like genetic genealogy, which cross-references crime-scene DNA with public ancestry databases, have given investigators leads where there were none. These tools, combined with the dogged pursuit of truth by both law enforcement and ordinary individuals, have brought closure to families who had long ago stopped hoping for answers. Stay with us until the end as we explore these chilling and heart-wrenching stories, and witness how justice was finally served, often in the most unexpected of ways. Case 1. The Murder of April Tinsley. April Tinsley was just 8 years old when her life was tragically cut short in 1988. Her case, which began in the small town of Fort Wayne, Indiana, would go on to haunt her community for decades. What makes this story particularly chilling isn't just the crime itself, but the eerie taunts from her killer that followed, a grim reminder that he had escaped justice for far too long. How could someone commit such an unthinkable act and then have the audacity to torment an entire town? And perhaps the most pressing question, how did it take 30 years to find the answers? April was a bright and cheerful child, loved by her family and well-liked by her peers. On April 1, 1988, she was walking home from a friend's house when she suddenly vanished. Her family immediately knew something was wrong when she didn't come home, and a frantic search began. Tragically, their worst fears were confirmed 3 days later when April's body was found in a ditch about 20 miles away. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The discovery shattered the small community of Fort Wayne, leaving residents in fear and grief. The investigation into April's murder was exhaustive. Law enforcement interviewed hundreds of people, collected evidence, and followed every lead they could find. Yet, despite their best efforts, the case went cold. Years passed, and April's name became synonymous with a mystery that seemed destined to remain unsolved. Then, in 1990, the killer resurfaced in the most unsettling way. A note was found scrawled on a barn door, written in crude, childlike handwriting. It read, "I kill 8-year-old April M. Tinsley. I will kill again." Alongside the message was a chilling declaration of the killer's confidence that he wouldn't be caught. For nearly 2 decades, the case remained stagnant. Then, in 2004, the killer struck again, not with another murder, but with another taunt. Several residents in Fort Wayne found disturbing notes left at their homes, placed inside plastic bags along with used condoms and Polaroid pictures. The notes claimed responsibility for April's murder, and the DNA left behind matched the evidence collected in 1988. Despite this horrifying development, investigators still couldn't identify the perpetrator. The town was gripped with fear, knowing that April's killer was still out there, watching, and perhaps waiting. The breakthrough came in 2018, when advancements in DNA technology finally gave investigators the edge they needed. Using genetic genealogy, a method that had only recently gained prominence, police were able to trace the DNA from the crime scene to a family tree. This led them to John D. Miller, a 59-year-old man living just a few miles from where April had been abducted. When officers approached Miller, he didn't deny his guilt. In fact, he confessed almost immediately, detailing the horrifying events of that day in 1988. He admitted to abducting April, assaulting her, and taking her life before discarding her body. His arrest sent shockwaves through the community, but it also brought a long-awaited sense of relief. For April's family, the arrest of John D. Miller was bittersweet. While they were grateful for the closure, the pain of losing April was something that time could never heal. Her mother expressed both sorrow and gratitude, thanking investigators for never giving up but mourning the years lost without her daughter. The community of Fort Wayne also found some solace, knowing that the man who had terrorized them for decades was finally behind bars. This case is a testament to the power of persistence and innovation in solving cold cases. It highlights how far forensic science has come and how tools like genetic genealogy can bring justice even when it seems impossible. Yet it also raises important questions about the nature of justice and the impact of such crimes on families and communities. Was justice truly served for April and her family? And how many other cases like hers remain unsolved, waiting for the right combination of technology and determination to bring the truth to light? April Tinsley's story is one that will never be forgotten. It's a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of never giving up, no matter how cold a case may seem. If you found this story compelling, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. Do you think advances in forensic technology will solve even more cases like this in the years to come? And what lessons can we learn from the decades it took to bring April's killer to justice? Case 2. The identification of the Bear Brook victims. The story of the Bear Brook victims is one of the most complex and unsettling cold cases in American history, a case that spanned decades and involved not just one, but multiple victims whose identities remained a mystery for years. It began in 1985, when a barrel was discovered in Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Inside were the bodies of an adult woman and a young girl, both wrapped in plastic. Their remains had decomposed significantly, and there were no immediate clues as to who they were or how they ended up in the park. The discovery was shocking, but it was only the beginning of a much larger, darker story. 15 years later, in 2000, a second barrel was found in the same area, just a short distance from the first. This time, the remains of 2 more young girls were uncovered, also wrapped in plastic. Investigators were now dealing with 4 unidentified victims, all linked by proximity and the horrifying circumstances of their deaths. Despite exhaustive efforts to determine their identities, the case went cold. There were no missing persons reports that matched the victims, no witnesses, and no clear suspects. The lack of answers frustrated investigators and haunted the community. For years, the mystery of the Bear Brook victims remained unsolved, and the case became a symbol of the limits of forensic science at the time. Who were these women and children? What had happened to them? And who was responsible for their deaths? These questions lingered until 2017, when a groundbreaking method of investigation changed everything. The key to unraveling the mystery came through genetic genealogy, a revolutionary technique that combines DNA analysis with genealogical research. By comparing DNA from the victims to public ancestry databases, investigators were able to trace their genetic connections to living relatives. This painstaking work led to the identification of 3 of the 4 victims. The adult woman was identified as Marlies Honeychurch, and the 2 younger girls were confirmed to be her daughters, Marie Vaughn and Sarah McWatters. They had last been seen in the late 1970s, when Marlies was in a relationship with a man named Terry Rasmussen. Rasmussen, also known as the Chameleon Killer, was a serial killer with a long history of using aliases and evading capture. He had been linked to other crimes, including the disappearance of another woman, Denise Bowden, and her daughter, whom he abducted and raised under a false identity. Rasmussen's pattern of deception and violence spanned decades, making him one of the most elusive criminals in modern history. By the time his connection to the Bear Brook victims was established, Rasmussen had already died in prison, leaving many questions unanswered. The 4th victim, a young girl who was not biologically related to Marlies or her daughters, remains unidentified to this day. Investigators believe she may have been another victim of Rasmussen's, possibly the child of one of his other relationships. Her identity, like so many other aspects of this case, is a haunting reminder of the lives forever altered by his actions. The identification of the Bear Brook victims was a monumental breakthrough, not just for the families involved but for the field of forensic science. It demonstrated the power of genetic genealogy to solve even the most challenging cases and brought hope to countless families still waiting for answers. However, it also highlighted the profound impact of these crimes on the victims' loved ones and the communities where they occurred. For the families of Marlies Honeychurch and her daughters, the identification provided a measure of closure, but it could never erase the pain of their loss. The discovery of their fate also raised questions about how Rasmussen was able to operate undetected for so long, and how many other victims might still be waiting to be found. The Bear Brook case is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives. It's a story of tragedy, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth. What do you think about the role of genetic genealogy in solving cases like this? Should more resources be devoted to using this technology to uncover the identities of other unidentified victims? Case 3. The Murder of Carla Walker. Carla Walker was just 17 years old when her life was brutally taken in a crime that would haunt her family and community for nearly 5 decades. The year was 1974, and Carla was a bright, vivacious high school student in Fort Worth, Texas. She had her whole life ahead of her, filled with promise and potential. But all of that was stolen one February night after a high school Valentine's Day dance. What happened to Carla was not only horrifying but also baffling, leaving investigators with more questions than answers for decades. The evening began as a celebration of young love. Carla and her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy, attended the dance and spent the evening enjoying each other's company. Afterward, they parked in a bowling alley lot, a common hangout spot for teenagers at the time. What should have been a romantic moment turned into a nightmare when a man suddenly approached their car. The stranger attacked Rodney, pistol-whipping him and rendering him unconscious. When Rodney came to, Carla was gone. Carla's body was discovered 3 days later in a culvert near Lake Benbrook, about 20 miles from where she had been abducted. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The brutality of the crime shocked the Fort Worth community, and law enforcement worked tirelessly to find her killer. Despite their efforts, the case quickly went cold. Leads dried up, and no suspect could be definitively linked to the crime. Carla's family was left devastated, struggling with the loss of their daughter and the lack of answers. For decades, the case remained a painful mystery. Carla's family never stopped hoping for justice, but as the years turned into decades, the possibility of finding her killer seemed to slip further away. Then, in 2020, nearly 46 years after Carla's murder, a breakthrough came thanks to the same technology that had solved so many other cold cases in recent years: genetic genealogy. Investigators had preserved DNA evidence from Carla's case, and with advancements in forensic science, they were able to create a genetic profile of the suspect. Using genealogy databases, they identified a man named Glenn McCurley, who had been questioned in 1974 but never charged due to lack of evidence. At the time, McCurley had owned a gun similar to the one used in Carla's abduction, but without DNA or witnesses to tie him to the crime, the case against him was weak. When confronted with the new evidence, McCurley confessed to the crime, providing a chilling account of what happened that night. He admitted to abducting Carla, assaulting her, and leaving her body near the lake. His confession brought an end to one of Fort Worth's most infamous cold cases, but it also reopened old wounds for Carla's family. They had waited decades for answers, and while they were relieved to finally know the truth, the pain of her loss was as fresh as ever. Carla's story is a powerful example of how perseverance and advancements in forensic science can bring long overdue justice. Her family, who had spent years advocating for her case to remain open, finally saw the person responsible held accountable. In 2021, Glenn McCurley was convicted of Carla's murder and sentenced to life in prison. The verdict brought a measure of closure, but it could never undo the years of grief and unanswered questions. Carla Walker's case is a reminder of the importance of never giving up, even when all hope seems lost. It also underscores the incredible potential of genetic genealogy to solve cold cases and provide answers to families who have waited far too long. As we reflect on Carla's story, we're left to wonder, How many other cases like hers are just waiting for the right combination of technology and determination to be solved? Case 4. The murder of Stephanie Isaacson. Stephanie Isaacson was just 14 years old when her life was tragically taken in 1989, leaving her family and the Las Vegas community devastated. She was a bright, promising teenager with her whole future ahead of her, but that future was stolen in a brutal and senseless act of violence. For over 3 decades, Stephanie's case remained unsolved, a haunting reminder of how elusive justice can be. But in recent years, thanks to groundbreaking advancements in forensic science, her story has taken a remarkable turn, providing answers that her family had long awaited. It was a typical summer morning on June 1, 1989, when Stephanie left her home to walk to school. The route was familiar, one she had taken many times before. But that day, Stephanie never made it to class. When she didn't return home, her family immediately knew something was wrong and reported her missing. A search ensued, and later that same day, Stephanie's body was discovered in a vacant lot along her usual path to school. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The discovery shocked the community and launched an intense investigation. Law enforcement worked tirelessly, collecting evidence and interviewing potential witnesses, but the case quickly hit a wall. DNA evidence was recovered from the crime scene, but in 1989, forensic technology was not advanced enough to identify a suspect. As the years passed, the case grew colder, and Stephanie's family was left with no answers, only the enduring pain of their loss. The breakthrough came in 2021, more than 30 years after Stephanie's murder, when the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department decided to revisit the case using new forensic tools. The DNA evidence from the crime scene, though minimal, was submitted for analysis using a revolutionary technique called genetic genealogy. This method, which compares crime scene DNA to profiles in public genealogy databases, has solved numerous cold cases in recent years, and Stephanie's case was no exception. What made this case particularly extraordinary was the amount of DNA required for analysis. Only 15 human cells, an incredibly small sample, were needed to create a genetic profile. This was a testament to how far forensic science had come since the late 1980s. The analysis led investigators to a man named Darren Roy Marchand, who had been a suspect in another murder in the 1980s but was never convicted. Marchand had taken his own life in 1995, meaning he would never face justice for his crimes. However, the identification brought a sense of resolution to Stephanie's case. For Stephanie's family, the identification of her killer was bittersweet. While they were relieved to finally know the truth, they were also confronted with the reality that Marchand could never be held accountable in a court of law. Her mother expressed gratitude to the investigators and the scientists who had worked tirelessly to solve the case, but she also acknowledged that the pain of losing Stephanie would never truly go away. The resolution of Stephanie Isaacson's case is a powerful example of how even the smallest pieces of evidence can lead to justice, given enough time and the right technology. It also highlights the incredible potential of genetic genealogy to solve cases that once seemed unsolvable. Stephanie's story serves as a beacon of hope for other families waiting for answers, showing that no matter how much time has passed, justice can still be achieved. As we reflect on Stephanie's case, we're reminded of the importance of persistence and innovation in the pursuit of justice. What are your thoughts on the role of genetic genealogy in solving cold cases? Should more resources be dedicated to using this technology to bring closure to other families? Case 5. The Murder of Eve Wilkowitz. Eve Wilkowitz was just 20 years old when her life was tragically cut short in 1984. A young woman with dreams and aspirations, Eve had moved to New York City to pursue a career in fashion. But her bright future was stolen from her when she was brutally murdered in her apartment. The case was chilling, and for years, Eve's family and the New York City police were left with few leads and no answers. Her death became one of the city's many unsolved murders, a cold case that would linger in the background for decades. But thanks to modern forensic technology and the tireless work of investigators, Eve's case was eventually solved in a way that no one could have predicted. Eve was living in an apartment in the bustling neighborhood of the Upper West Side of Manhattan. On the evening of her death, she had been spending time with friends, and it seemed like a normal night. But when her friends tried to reach her the next day and couldn't get in touch, they became concerned. After a few days, Eve's body was discovered in her apartment. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled, her death a violent and senseless act that left her loved ones devastated. The investigation into Eve's murder was intense, but the evidence was sparse. There were no witnesses, no clear motive, and no immediate suspects. The case quickly grew cold, and for years, Eve's family had to live with the pain of not knowing who had taken their daughter's life or why. Despite the passage of time, the NYPD never gave up on the case, and it remained open, though there were few breakthroughs. The key to solving Eve Wilkowitz's murder came in 2019, when the NYPD decided to revisit the case using new forensic tools. DNA evidence recovered from the crime scene had been preserved, and with the advent of genetic genealogy, investigators were able to use this evidence in a way that was not possible in 1984. By comparing the DNA from the crime scene to genealogical databases, they were able to trace the suspect's lineage and identify a man named Robert Bob Johnson, who had been a suspect in an earlier case but had never been charged. Johnson, a man with a history of violent crime, had been living in New York City at the time of Eve's murder. His DNA matched the evidence from Eve's case, and in 2019, he was arrested and charged with her murder. The investigation revealed that Johnson had a long history of criminal activity, and his violent tendencies had escalated over the years. He had been living under a false identity for many years, but the DNA evidence finally brought him to justice. For Eve's family, the arrest and eventual conviction of Robert Johnson brought a sense of closure, but it was bittersweet. They had spent decades without answers, and while they were relieved to know who had killed their daughter, the pain of losing her was never truly erased. The resolution of Eve's case also raised questions about how many other victims had been affected by Johnson's violent actions over the years. His arrest was a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the facades of ordinary people. Eve Wilkowitz's case is a powerful example of how advancements in forensic technology, particularly genetic genealogy, can breathe new life into cold cases. It demonstrates that no matter how much time has passed, justice can still be achieved. For Eve's family, the resolution of her case was a long-awaited moment of justice, but it also served as a reminder of the many families still waiting for answers in unsolved cases. The story of Eve's murder is a testament to the persistence of law enforcement and the power of modern forensic science. It also highlights the importance of never giving up on seeking justice, no matter how long it takes. As we reflect on Eve's case, we're left to wonder, how many other cold cases are out there, waiting to be solved with the right technology and determination? The cases we've explored today, April Tinsley, the Bear Brook victims, Carla Walker, Stephanie Isaacson, and Eve Wilkowitz, are haunting reminders of the power of persistence and the advancements in forensic science. These families, once left in the dark, have finally received the answers they so desperately sought. Justice may take time, but as these cases show, it is never truly out of reach. If you found these stories as compelling as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Let's keep pushing for answers in every case, no matter how cold.